Es algo importante a tener en cuenta cuando pensamos en los productores de petróleo y de gas. México también es un productor significativo. Cuando hablo de México, quiero que piensen en algunos de los problemas que se comparten con Canadá y otros países. No puedo hablar de todo el continente americano, así que voy a hablar de Norteamérica, conjunto a los Estados Unidos, que es también uno de los principales productores de petróleo. Canadá es el cuarto, al menos hablando de petróleo. 75% de ese petróleo viene de las regiones de Alberta, de donde yo vengo. Es un tipo de operación diferente. No se cavan pozos, no se perforan pozos, sino que se minan. Se minan las arenas bituminosas, se cargan los camiones, se llevan a una ubicación central en donde se procesan para crear un crudo. Se procesa el crudo pesado para después generar productos derivados del petróleo. Esto representa un 75% de la producción de gas y petróleo de Canadá. ¿A dónde va? Bueno, 80% de la producción se va a los Estados Unidos. Tenemos una relación tan estrecha que incluso me incomoda hablar de ella. ¿Alguien se siente igual? Los Estados Unidos son diferentes. Ellos, en lo que refiere a ser un país productor, están en la misma categoría que Canadá. Al pensar en los Estados Unidos, hay que pensar en dos palabras. La primera
is what the incoming president of the United States thinks climate change is.
La primera es farsa, que es lo que el futuro presidente de Estados Unidos cree que es el cambio climático, una farsa. La segunda palabra es California.
Nice place to go.
Es un lugar bonito
There are 42 million people in California.
con 48 millones de personas.
A not very small country anymore. And
Ya no es un lugar pequeño.
produces some
California produce algo de petróleo,
the best policies and
pero también tienen una de las mejores políticas y leyes para llegar a los objetivos del net cero.
country anywhere really.
Esto en general de cualquier otro país. California contra otros estados
States and some of the
como Nueva Inglaterra
states.
o algunos otros estados del noroeste representan esto.
It's not going to abandon
Los Estados Unidos no van a abandonar sus objetivos de neto a cero ni su trayectoria. Es solo que ahora van a ser diferentes. Su proceso va a ser diferente, va a depender de los estados.
problems.
Ahora, ¿cómo esto va a suceder y qué problemas llegarán de esto? Bueno, quién sabe.
Stay tuned with the media. You hear something different every day. Actually, I wouldn't recommend taking.
Yo no les recomendaría meterse mucho en este tema. Es muy confuso.
So that's what I have in mind.
Eso es lo que tengo en mente, la idea de seguridad y equidad intergeneracional en la transición neta a cero. La seguridad del suministro, claro, pero no solo del suministro físico, sino del suministro fiscal. Es decir, todas las ganancias en gravamen que se generan de un país que utiliza las mismas ganancias. Esto al final se utiliza para programas sociales como educación, salud, bienestar social. Esa es la forma en que nuestras provincias en Canadá presentan la idea de seguridad de suministro. La forma en la que yo lo veo es que estos países que son grandes productores se encuentran en un dilema. Este dilema surge entre la seguridad de suministro que acabo de describir y toda la discusión que se ha generado con respecto a los objetivos para el 2050. Si redoblamos las pláticas sobre la seguridad del suministro, nos llegan problemas sociales. Es lo que a lo que nos enfrentamos en las provincias en Canadá. Cualquier dirección que nos dirijamos, hay un enfoque intergeneracional que se preocupa al respecto. Una implicación resultante podría ser reducir o incluso abolir la industria en el país en un tiempo relativamente corto. Pero esa idea a la gente no le gusta. Es el dilema al que nos enfrentamos. Pueden ver los números. Canadá es uno de los principales productores de petróleo y gas, tiene muchas reservas. Solo estamos por detrás de Venezuela e Irán. Son reservas enormes. En términos fiscales, el PIB, el petróleo y el gas representan un 2 a 3% del Producto Interno Bruto. El PIB de Alberta, representado por el petróleo y el gas, es 22%. O sea, Alberta se iría a la quiebra mañana si cerramos esta industria. Ese es nuestro dilema y ese es nuestro contexto. Es lo que vemos en Alberta. Tenemos un gobierno federal que quiere llegar a las metas de la transición neta a cero para 2050, como el doctor Del Guayo mencionó. Y por otro lado, tenemos un gobierno local que produce tanto como pueda. Ellos saben que no van a poder producir el mismo tipo de petróleo y gas por siempre. Van a hacer todo lo que puedan en el momento. Ese es nuestro dilema actual. Ahora ya les mostré la posición de de la provincia, el aspecto de la seguridad del suministro. Por otro lado, el Plan Federal Climático, vamos a ver de qué trata. Este es el plan federal. Una reducción significativa de las emisiones para 2030, las emisiones netas cero para 2050 y una industria del gas y el petróleo con un límite de emisiones propuesto al 30%.
at least until this year, when it seems like nothing.
Eso es algo que se discutió junto a la Unión Europea, al menos este año. No sé si alguien siguió las noticias.
This year,
El COP29 tuvo
so
lugar hace poco.
this federal plan goes very much beyond that. This is
El plan federal va mucho más allá de lo que se estableció.
countries were buying into in 2015. So further, the federal government is proposing.
El gobierno federal también ha propuesto de nuevo un límite a las emisiones.
System,
De lo que se trata es de un sistema de límite y de negociación.
totals by the oil and gas industry, and within that cap, then allowances.
Se planea llegar a un límite con distintas concesiones a las diferentes empresas para sus propias emisiones.
To meet
Se pueden utilizar estas concesiones para llegar a los objetivos dispuestos en el plan federal.
other ways of reducing their emissions, technological.
Si hay otras formas de reducir las emisiones, ya sea de manera tecnológica, por ejemplo, entonces se pueden utilizar e intercambiarlas, ¿no? Te las vendo, vamos a hacer dinero a partir de esto, o se puede negociar con ellas de alguna otra manera.
uh, Economic instrument scheme.
Es un esquema de instrumentos económicos que se tienen en mente.
Okay. How are they going to do that?
¿Cómo van a hacerlo?
That's the next slide, so that's the federal legislation. Canada already has a carbon tax.
Canadá ya tiene un impuesto al carbono
Tax scheme.
significativo,
Yes. So it's carbon tax.
que es el acta de precios de contaminación de gases de efecto invernadero. Esto se le aplica a los carros, a las calefacciones, a las estufas. Si se tiene algo de eso, se paga un impuesto al respecto. La idea es que esto tenga una influencia en el comportamiento de la población. Eso significa que, bueno, si es más caro, vamos a manejar menos, porque el precio es más alto y más alto y más alto.
As the slide indicates, the Supreme Court of Canada upheld the constitutionality.
La Corte Suprema de Canadá
The court said.
le dio respaldo a esta acta. Dijo,
National standards.
se trata sobre los estándares nacionales mínimos de restricciones de precios para las emisiones de gas de efecto invernadero.
Saying that this is
Lo que dicen es que esto es un estatuto de impuestos, un estatuto fiscal, no ambiental,
what they produce.
no es una regulación.
And this is important because of the.
Resulta importante por la forma en que está redactada la Constitución.
Tax,
El impuesto al carbono, restricciones al metano,
powerful greenhouse gas, about 12 times CO2.
los gases de efecto invernadero poderosos
Been a preoccupation of the
son una de las principales preocupaciones del gobierno federal. También está el acta de responsabilidad de las emisiones neto a cero,
tiny kind of statute. The Minister of the Environment every 5 years.
la cual es ratificada cada 5 años por el ministerio pertinente.
Reduction plan.
Se tiene un plan de reducción de emisiones
2050.
contemplado hasta 2050.
And so this is sort of the notebook for implementing the federal legislation.
Esos son los planes que se tienen para la legislación de la transición neta a cero para 2050. En el lado tecnológico, almacenamiento y utilización de la captura de carbono. Se trata de capturar el CO2 almacenarlo, es decir, mandarlo a una ubicación subterránea y que se quede ahí para siempre, en teoría. Suena como una buena idea, ¿no? Claro, tiene problemas. Lo primero es cómo lo vamos a llevar ahí. Tuberías, bueno, es algo difícil. Segundo, está la pregunta, ¿de verdad se va a quedar ahí? Tan solo hace 2 semanas sucedió algo en los Estados Unidos donde hubo una fuga significativa. Creo que fue en Illinois. Esto significa que los problemas no se van a resolver así. Sin embargo, el gobierno piensa que es uno de los principales instrumentos que se van a utilizar para lograr los objetivos. Por último, también hay subsidios federales y provinciales, así como créditos fiscales. ¿Para qué? Para quienes consigan autos eléctricos. Ya pueden imaginarse las controversias que esto crea. Obvio, a las compañías no les importa, ellos solo dicen no es suficiente. Esta es la respuesta legal. ¿Cuáles son las limitaciones? ¿Cuáles son las limitaciones del gobierno federal al respecto? Todas estas legislaciones parecen anticuadas, parecen hechas solo para obtener tanto dinero como se pueda. ¿Cuáles son las limitaciones que pone el gobierno canadiense?
En primer lugar, me gustaría mencionar a la Constitución canadiense, ¿no? El- invito a los estudiantes a que vengan a estudiar Derecho canadiense, ¿no? Para que tengan todos los detalles, ¿no? Es una constitución sumamente extraña, ¿no? Por ejemplo, bajo las provisiones de la ley de la Constitución canadiense, tenemos dos juegos de poderes legislativos. Tenemos el poder legislativo de la provincia y el poder legislativo federal. Del lado federal tenemos el poder realmente. Para el derecho penal, podríamos considerar que eso es una previsión de la ley local, pero no lo es. Para nosotros tiene una supremacía constitucional, pero así, hablando de manera legal y constitucionalmente, tenemos todo este tipo de, tenemos todo este tipo de situaciones, ¿no? Entonces, idealmente, podríamos tener una convivencia efectiva entre ambos cuerpos de la ley, pero es un poco complicado. Y de hecho, este es el problema. Eh, el poder constitucional ha sido utilizado por la Federación para constituir implementaciones de legislación. Sin embargo, lo otro que quiero mencionar y que sí es extraño también es que todas las tierras públicas del país van con las provincias y ahí hay recursos naturales en la tierra. En Canadá, el 90% de la producción de gas y petróleo viene de tierras públicas. El gobierno federal también nos dice que no queremos negar el valor que tiene tu propiedad, porque pues sí, aquí hay recursos petrolíferos. Entonces, la Constitución. Bueno, quiero mencionar algo más sobre los poderes constitucionales. El gobierno federal es algo que llamamos, es un poder residual que existe, que en lo que no entra en estas columnas de la legislación constitucional o que caiga en la local, lo absorbe el poder federal. El único problema con esto es definir las materias. que es como lo mencioné previamente, ¿no? Con la ley de impuestos sobre el carbono. Es una ley fiscal. De un lado, la Constitución le da a los federales el poder sobre las finanzas nacionales y los bancos y los valores. Pero también, como se los mencioné, los poderes de las provincias, que son como los estatales, tienen propiedades y tienen negocios dentro de las provincias que pertenecen a la industria del gas o del petróleo. Entonces, en este caso, con esta ley, es un estatuto fiscal, no es regulatorio, por lo tanto cae en el poder de las provincias. Pero las cortes de las provincias empezaron a tener dudas sobre esta decisión. Entonces tenemos esta idea en donde son intereses de la nación. Y podemos pensar un poco en situaciones que nos interesen a nivel nacional y que tratemos de aplicar la legislación que les estoy mencionando, en particular esta situación de la cuenta de las emisiones, del tope de las emisiones y el sistema del conteo de las emisiones que está dentro del plan federal, ¿no? Entonces, ellos ya eh, están redactando ya las demandas para casos constitucionales que tienen que ver con esta situación. Entonces, estas son limitaciones sumamente serias. Siguiente diapositiva, por favor.
We're about a year from,
Estamos
federal
a un
election.
año de las elecciones federales generales y los liberales están 20 puntos por detrás. ¿Detrás de quién? Del Partido Conservador, claro. Esto es algo que está sucediendo en todo el mundo, no podemos negarlo. Y entonces yo creo que van a ser derrotados los liberales, sin lugar a dudas. Pero algo que los conservadores han estado diciendo es que realmente no hablan mucho de sus acciones, sino de lo que quieren hacer. Así es como se consiguen votos, pero lo primero que quieren hacer es quitar este impuesto al carbono. Y todo esto lo podemos consultar en las redes sociales, en la televisión. Y el modelo que ellos quieren promover es dale baje a esta ley. Axe the tax. Básicamente van a cortar de tajo esta ley. Y esto es una actitud muy popular en este momento, a pesar de que el gobierno federal ya toma todos estos impuestos y devuelve el 90% a los canadienses.
Checks in the mail or deposits.
Nos hacen depósitos a nuestras cuentas bancarias. Entonces, piensen en esto, ¿no? O sea, los canadienses no piensan de dónde sale este dinero, ¿saben? Parece que la mayoría de los canadienses no se dan cuenta que realmente el gobierno les está regresando estos impuestos de manera regular. Entonces, vamos a darle un cortón a esta ley. Básicamente es lo que dicen los conservadores y la gente los están apoyando. Es básicamente la versión republicana de los... No es nuestra versión republicana como canadienses, ¿no? De Trump, básicamente. Entonces,
First of all, the technologies are developed.
creo que se están desarrollando las tecnologías adecuadas, pero las compañías petroleras de Canadá también están en competencia con las compañías estadounidenses. Entonces, realmente aquí es en donde tenemos que ponernos también competitivos, pero para poder ser competitivos con las empresas norteamericanas petroleras, esto realmente tendría que caer en varios de los esquemas que estamos mencionando. Hay también ciertas tecnologías que todavía no existen para poder mantenernos dentro de los límites adecuados actualmente. Esto no va a ser por siempre. La última de las limitaciones que me gustaría mencionar es, son los derechos medioambientales. Son bastante débiles. Entonces, estamos trabajando de tal forma,
Implemented.
estas leyes no están implementadas completamente. El Acuerdo de París y su legislación, la legislación con respecto a los acuerdos de París es muy vaga, es muy laxa, es muy, 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 muy laxa.
The argument is
El argumento que se maneja es que tenemos nuestra Carta de Derechos y Libertades. Y en esta carta se alega que es el derecho a la libertad, a la seguridad. Suena un poquito estadounidense, lo cual me incomoda un poco, pero créanme que sí los mencionamos en nuestra Carta de Libertades canadiense, pero pensemos en nuestras libertades individuales y cómo el cambio climático puede afectarlas. Los casos hasta este punto que se han promovido a través de esta Carta Magna no los han tomado los tribunales hasta este punto. Han tomado las quejas para revisarlas, pero las han devuelto y les piden que cambien los argumentos para que la corte pueda tomar en cuenta sus demandas. ¿Y cuál es el problema con esto? Aquí tenemos dos problemas. El primero es la justificación. En otras palabras, los tribunales están diciendo, estos no son problemas para los tribunales, estos son problemas de la legislación, de la legislatura. Y lo segundo, de acuerdo con esto, es que estos son derechos positivos. Entonces se solicita al gobierno que haga algo al respecto. Entonces volvemos a este cuento de nunca acabar, ¿no? Que te están diciendo no nos pertenece a nosotros, el problema es de la legislatura, el problema no es del tribunal, es del gobierno. Yo me encuentro escéptico que cualquiera de estos casos realmente va a ser va a sentar precedente, por lo menos en Canadá. El, el uso de los derechos medioambientales para poder modificar la legislación federal lo veo muy complicado realmente. Entonces, estas son los límites, las limitaciones. Estas son las limitaciones. Y ahora pasaremos a la parte de las conclusiones. ¿Creemos que Canadá pueda alcanzar neta cero 2050? No lo sé, no lo sé. Esa es la realidad, ¿no? O sea, no lo sé. Estamos, o sea, no tenemos decisiones judiciales ni constitucionales concisas. Los derechos están ahí, sí, hay derechos, pero no hay legislación. Y algo que no mencioné es el desconocimiento de si el gobierno federal y las provincias van a trabajar con aras en la colaboración, porque esto se tiene que coordinar. Sí, este es un reto que no van a poder superar de forma independiente, tienen que unirse. Entonces hay mucho, no sé qué es lo que vaya a pasar. Estamos en la nave de la incertidumbre. Vamos a la última diapositiva, por favor. ¿Ustedes qué ven ahí? ¿Qué es para ustedes? ¿Qué ven en la imagen? Deforestation. Sí, solía ser un bosque, solía ser un bosque, solía ser un bosque. Este es el escenario de la Columbia Británica, la provincia de la Columbia Británica, un área natural. Entonces, vean la tierra, vean la tierra. Parece, parece, mm, parece nieve, pero no, es ceniza. El fuego era tan intenso que solo dejó cenizas a su alrededor.
They look like black soda straws. There's nothing in those.
Pero parecen tiras negras de carbón paradas. Ya no podríamos decir que esto parece un árbol, ¿verdad? Esta foto la tomaron a 200 yardas de una cabaña familiar en la parte central de la provincia de la Columbia Británica. Este incendio, eh, pues, no afectó nuestra cabaña por 200 yardas, pero sí alcanzó 800 hectáreas. Eso es bastante terreno, ¿no? En 2024, hasta este punto, en la Columbia Británica, alrededor de 3.000, más, mejor dicho, más de 3.000 incendios se han dado, todos con una fuente de causa natural que han sido los relámpagos y se han quemado alrededor de 3 millones de hectáreas. Si ustedes creen que esto es un problema pequeño, están en lo correcto, están en lo correcto. ¿Qué es lo que estos fuegos, estos incendios descargan en la atmósfera? Exactamente, muchísimo carbón, una cantidad increíble de carbón. Tanto que realmente amenaza con ser un, un desaliento para los planes que el gobierno ha puesto en acción para controlar las emisiones de carbono. Entonces esto era lo que yo les quería comentar, un poquito de lo que estamos viviendo en Canadá. Estamos hablando de los ecosistemas, sí, claro, claro que es importante, pero aquí estamos hablando también de una situación real que nos afecta. Al final del día todos somos gente, todos somos personas, ¿no? Y sabemos de situaciones como esta en donde algunas bosques o áreas protegidas se están viendo bajo la amenaza de los incendios. Y eso es todo. Muchísimas gracias.
Esa gran duda, ¿no?
Only thing left is as well as technology development. So we always think that we can bring your plans, replicate them, and to make our surroundings to improve. And it may happen. It may happen. But now we found that the problem is not only because because we are a poor country or a rich country, but as it has been said all day long, it is a problem that concerns everyone. We all contribute in a higher or a lower degree to the carbon emissions. But at the end of the day, we're all in the same pocket. We have just one planet Earth, right? Thank you. Thank you for sharing the specific problems that you have identified, such as taxation. In Mexico, we have taxation problems in the implementation of a tax policy because it happens the same than in Canada. There's a confusion between being an instrument to protect the environment, or are we talking about just getting benefits for the nation, right? But then it turns out that it is the political treasure that the legislators fight for, right? What happens when a party takes advantage of a legislation to generate an economical benefit to the population, but without telling them that we are affecting higher values such as natural resources and the environment? And of course, It compromises our survival, right?
Para,
And something
para la gente que estamos queriendo apoyar, que estamos haciendo conciencia.
to the people that are generating awareness regarding these problems. We have an intergenerational responsibility because we're trying to be responsible. And the ones before us, they did their part. But what we currently do today will definitely resound in the future. We must always think that there is going to be someone on the actions that we do or do not. I won't take 10 minutes. Believe me, I won't take 10 minutes, but I just want to be really specific with the message I'm going to share. It was a really clear explanation by Professor Lucas. And I just want to say that this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just the tip of the iceberg. We have been working for decades with this. I don't think that we're going to be done anytime soon, but I want to share with you my concern. A concern in my surroundings, in my professional and academic and social surroundings that have to do with the powers, such big powers that resist to the real change, to improve and protect nature, and to avoid, reduce, and revert climate change. There are two powers that are always there, putting all their efforts against it. Political power and economical power. Every single time we step up in the fight to protect our environment, our natural resources, there's the hand of the political power and the economical power. Benefits, social benefits, and economical benefits. That's how they say it should be. Now we're trying to face these two powers that are stopping us. I invite you to think about it, not only on the work that we do, but to be more critical towards those powers. And let's give us the chance to turn the tables in pro of the earth. I don't know how will we do this, but I know that we can thrive. I know that we can cast our votes beyond colors, without philosophy, without sympathies, or in a specific person. Let's think about voting for policies and for economic development that we're accountable for. Thank you very much, Professor Lucas. Thank you. Tenemos un par de preguntas. La primera, en relación a los objetivos de Net Zero, ¿hay algún progreso en Canadá al cambiar de los vehículos de combustión interna hacia, como en el caso de California? Y en el segundo, ¿usted cree que es demasiado tarde para alcanzar los objetivos Net Zero del 2030? Cuando hablamos de los autos eléctricos y de los autos eléctricos subsidiados, ¿se refieren a eso? Sí, como lo mencioné, sí hay muchos planes en las provincias. Algunas dan grandes subsidios y otras no ofrecen nada. Pero en el último año, estos subsidios han tenido una tendencia a la desaparición. Y esto es porque el mercado de los autos eléctricos ha comenzado a desaparecer también, se ha ido reduciendo. Yo creo que esta tecnología sí tiene un papel importante, pero no tan importante. La tecnología de los autos eléctricos no va a tener un papel como lo propone Elon Musk, que es el principal promotor de este tipo de automóviles. Pero creo que tenemos que utilizar y pensar de manera estratégica con el uso de las tecnologías que tenemos disponibles.
I don't want to talk about silver bullet.
Yo no quiero hablar de la bala de plata, ¿verdad? Porque no hay balas de plata para este problema, ¿ok?
Uh, Too late for what?
Pero es demasiado tarde, ¿para qué? ¿Para qué?
Okay, I don't think we're gonna make net zero.
No creo que, no creo que vayamos a llegar ni siquiera a Net Zero 50.
I think we will make progress.
Yo creo que sí va a haber progreso. Pienso que habrá progreso y uno de los problemas, como se mencionó en el panel de la mañana, es el resto del mundo.
Be myopic in the way that you suggested, but we're also being very myopic in.
Estamos siendo muy miopes en la forma en la que estamos enfrentando este problema y también en la forma en la que pensamos en este problema, sobre todo en la sociedad occidental. La sociedad oriental tiene diferentes tipos de pensamiento y hay países que están manejándolo de forma individual, pero
It's gonna be a lot more
la
complicated.
situación es que es muy complicado si todos lo vamos a hacer de manera distinta. Creo que realmente aquí tenemos que tener un frente común. Al final del día, al final del día es como la fotografía que le mencioné, como la foto que les enseñé, ¿no?
In the 45
Piensen en esto, en 45 años que mi cabaña, que la cabaña de mi familia ha estado ahí, es la primera vez que el fuego está tan cerca. A lo mejor fue un caso especial, pero no lo creo. Estas citas se van a seguir dando y más seguido de lo que pensamos. Muchísimas gracias. Gracias a todos. Ahora, me gustaría darle este reconocimiento de participación, este diploma de participación. Este es para usted por parte de la Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana y algunos regalos, unos presentes.
I'll put it on my wall right next to.
Voy a poner esto en mi pared, en donde, al lado de mi certificado de nacimiento, casi, casi.
Gracias, tenemos solo 5 minutitos nada más para.
Well, we have just 5 minutes. 5 minute break.
No recibimos audio, ¿eh?
To the environmental justice, to access of the information in environmental subjects, and the participation of the public in general. Adding an additional branch that is Article 9 that talks about the environmental defenders. Advocates. The right to access of justice, it's reduced to the right to access to the jurisdictional organs that are independent and impartial, that implement a ruling towards a legal controversy that is determined through a process that needs to follow a protocol. Nevertheless, the interpretation of the right of access to justice, I consider, shouldn't be limited to the access of the jurisdiction, but it should be understood in a wider sense as the adoption of a series of actions, measures, public policies that contribute to the instauration of a society that is more fair by privileging as much as possible a preventive focus than a reactive action. In the case of the environmental advocates that I mentioned minutes ago, according to the last report of Global Witness, Mexico is the third most dangerous countries to advocate for the environment. According to a report that we work with in our office, the report on the situation of environmental advocates in Mexico, in 2023, we had 123 events of aggressions towards advocates. 20 of them were killed. 76 of these aggressions were perpetrated against indigenous people. And the worst of all, I think, is that the main actor is the state, the police, the DAs, the Marines, the National Guard, and the army. So we consider that it is more than necessary to guarantee the proper atmosphere for the advocacy of the human rights, which is a right, the right to defend my human rights. The protection mechanism to the advocates and journalists that we have it at the Ministry of the Interior should be improved. It is perfectible. It should be strengthened. And we consider that there should be independent mechanisms for protection of the journalists that have a hard time, but also that take into account the environmental advocates. Up to date, there is no one who is under investigation. There's no one under a penalty. There's no one that is in jail for having killed or having battery on an environment advocate. So basically, it is impunity of 100%. We need to create an effort to change things. So I would like to go briefly on the judicial guarantees regarding the Escazú agreement. First, access to justice and environmental matters. Even though we have some mandatory criteria by the judiciary regarding the Escazú
falta,
agreement.
entre otras cosas, adecuar las leyes federales y locales
We need to fit the federal
para que contemplen
and the local laws that to guarantee the access to justice in
aspectos
environmental subjects.
se destacan los siguientes.
It is important to highlight the following matters: the active legitimation,
La operatividad de medidas
the operational of
facilidades probatorias y mecanismos de ejecución y cumplimiento
precautionary measures, and the resolution application, taking into account the peculiarities of the environmental damage, the importance of the branch of law, and the complexity of the technical knowledge
acceso al informe
on the environmental subjects. Regarding the access to information, the Escazú
de garantizar el
Accord
derecho de acceso a la información
establishes that the access to information, environmental information access, is fundamental for accessing information. In such sense, the INAI disappearance that has been concrete and sealed as we are here, there's a potential challenge in terms of access to information that will make access to justice a little bit more complicated. Let me briefly explain to you that one of the things that Mexico committed and the states that are part of Escazú to have independent organs in the subject of transparency and access to public governance information. And what is happening here, the National Institute for Access to Information has been disappeared as of today.
poner acciones legales en contra de lo que va a suceder hoy por la desaparición de
So we need to take legal action regarding the extinction of INAI, of the National Institute for the Access to Information.
y acceso a la
So to be transparent is how we can access justice regarding the environmental subjects.
zona de influencia del ecosistema.
It is important. It is just necessary to live in a natural area
Sin
to access to a mechanism of justice without need to credit
en cuanto al principio precautorio,
a damage.
la
Regarding the precautionary,
ha ido ganando terreno en el concepto de tutela anticipada.
in the precautionary principle, it is important to say that there should be just
Directamente puede
an act
daño
that can cause damage to the environment, even though there is scientific uncertainty regarding the damage, to be able to get a suspension and to revert
también están los medios
the burden of proof. There's also the alternative
la emisión de
mediation.
ley,
The issuance of this law,
materia de
it's of big importance in restoration justice, but it implies the challenges to set the institutions into motion to become a reality. Reconciliation centers, trained staff, specialization by branches, and regarding the efficiency of the sentences and the integral repair, it is necessary to highlight that the rulings do not include the international standards or the environmental context that increase the rights, but these are limited to the legal knowledge that many times are lack of a full assessment on the socio-environmental
no
conflicts.
se suelen incluir medidas de
It is important to mention that we do not include restoration measures,
incluyen garantías
and that on top of that, we can include guarantees of no repetition
la sanción.
or that they impose
Igualmente,
the specific sanctions. There are few resolutions that include mechanisms of supervision that are effective,
ejemplo,
in which it is established how to measure the compliance in a clear way, and that they allocate the necessary budget for the complete fulfilling of a judicial ruling.
La especialización
Regarding the specialization of jurisdictional organs, I consider that the Mexican state should have organs with specialized knowledge
como una
in environmental subjects as a necessary measure to guarantee the access to justice
de acuerdo a lo que establece
according to what is established in the 8th
el artículo
article of the Escazú Accords.
Federal de Responsabilidad
That's-
Ambiental
In the federal law,
donde establece
it is established that we need to have
especialmente
district courts that are properly trained in environmental subjects.
parte de los fondos
Last but not least, talking about the jurisdictional organs, the specialization can be reached through the instauration of specialized organs or through the specialization and proper training of the existing organs. Finally,
con respecto a la reforma judicial
regarding the
me parece
judiciary reform,
de la
I think that the elimination of the
un gran retroceso en materia de acceso a la justicia
judicial career is a step back because we are losing a necessary mechanism for the technical training of the judges and magistrates. The reform to the amparo law
pensión
eliminates the possibility to rule in the general, and it limits the litigation potential
a todas
to expand the protection towards all the people that are affected by an act of the authority. In other words, it is a reform that promotes excluent justice.
supuesto por todo lo que aquí he planteado
And for all the things that I have mentioned here, we have new challenges on the impartiality and independence through regarding the new electoral nature of the new judges.
pegado a la tierra, ¿no? Es,
No, talking,
o sea,
well, going back to earth, you know, there are a lot of things that affect
aquí
the title that I have here. Challenges and achievements of the human right to access to justice. There have been a lot of things besides what I commented that haven't allowed that there is a full access to the environmental justice. Corruption that has had a big presence. It makes that everything is solved in a different way. The lack of training and the specialization of many of the actors out there, it does not allow to guarantee that human right. The lack of knowledge,
la profundidad del marco constitucional en materia ambiental, la ley general, el reglamento
the guidelines, the rulings, and all the laws, the forest law, the water law,
a veces la falta de coordinación y de
and
comunicación
sometimes the lack of communication between the justice organisms is really bad. I mean, in consequence to that,
También tenemos
you cannot guarantee the right.
el hecho de que hay muchos espacios de participación social
The law.
y ambiental, ¿no? Y también
There's a lot of spaces of participation for the environmental law where we can state, if you check on the law, there's a lot of spaces for social participation that can guarantee these rights. Nevertheless, people don't know them. People don't know that they exist. For example, the fourth constitutional right, the access to a healthy environment. And we have some laws that are poorly written. Some of them overlap one to the other. And sometimes there is an invasion, a full invasion among the different levels of government. And sometimes
muchas veces por los intereses económicos.
in this country, you can see a lot of economical interests that direct many of the things that happen in the country. So there are multiple reasons that don't allow
Que estos derechos, digamos, sean
that these rights can be put into set into motion. I want to leave it here. I want to drop it here for the moment. I hope that what I mentioned can create dialogue among us. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Bien, gracias. Muchas gracias, maestro Gustavo Lavera.
Thank you, Professor Gustavo Lanitz. Next,
El profesor de la maestra Diana Ponce.
Miss Diana Ponce is going to take the floor.
¿Qué tal? Muy buenas tardes.
Hello, thank you very much. Hello, hello. Thank you to the organizers, to Professor who's here today with you. This event that makes us to double think what we are doing.
Experiencia personal.
My personal experience,
Internacional.
I have an international bias because that's how I got involved with environmental law. And I'm convinced that everything that we have done in Mexico in environmental matters is because something was negotiated at an international level for it to happen. And that is just in the best of the cases. We have important learnings from, for example, the creation of the FROPEPA. It happened after the explosion that happened in Guadalajara. Younger people won't know about what happened in Guadalajara back in the day, but in April 1992, a few months before going to Rio de Janeiro, a filtration of gasoline in the sewage created an explosion of a full neighborhood. The official numbers are 6,000 deceased and missing people. Just after that, the Federal Attorney's Office for the Protection of the Environment was created. This is not different from what has happened in some other parts of the world where catastrophe should happen before we all decide to do something as a government, as individuals, and as civil society to take action. What I learned in practice, I got my BA of law in the School of Law of UNAM without having heard about the environment. Even though I got my honorary mention, I never heard about the environment. I learned about this in the international forums. The adoption of the Rio de Janeiro Convention in July 1992 contains Principle 10, which is the access principle. There we talk about the right of the people and the obligation of the government to allow the access to information, the access to the participation in decision making, and the access to environmental justice. It is stated like that, and in 1992 it was not clear what was the scope of what we had, of what we named environmental justice. I agree with everything that Professor Alanis mentioned, but I'm pretty sure that we have had a progressive development of rules, guidelines, and laws to solve the environmental controversies. You said individual, not only individual rights, but the hard thing to do has been to have intergenerational collective rights with all the full list of mechanisms that we have. We need to use these legal tools as the collective amparos. And it is truth. In the last year, we have had some major setbacks, some dangerous setbacks. It took us 40 years to achieve the access to information with a simple interest. And I mean, I don't have to say my name to ask for information. I don't want to state why I want that information to be disclosed, but I need to know if we bought super expensive
Los pinos o
towels or super expensive socks for the president, or who are they hiring to build the Tren Maya in the peninsula, for example? So this active legitimation that is current up today
¿cómo se llama? Colgada de alfileres en la pared con estas modificaciones de las que ya
is on the pincushion right now.
en, en las escuelas de derecho
In schools,
encuentro
the law schools, I have found that
perfectamente a los
the
estudiantes
students are not properly
haya
taught
significado
on the meaning of currently having on the legal Mexican framework with collective intergenerational goods. This specific definition talks about the rights on their own. And it also talks about the environment and the natural elements that sustain these rights to have access to water, air, soil, biodiversity. It is there unless we just want to walk around with an oxygen tank. These are collective, intangible goods. And to understand that, we need interdisciplinary work. This is clearly coming from international law. Another important thing since the end of the 90s is this trend, this requirement to consider and respect the rights of the local communities and indigenous people that help us understand, acknowledge, and defend the traditions, the cultural identities, the values, practices, visions, systems of knowledge by local groups. How do they planify, how they manage the resources, how they manage the lands that they possess. This has been set in the Agreement 169 and the Escazú Agreement. And we just had there the second article of the Constitution back that was amended in September this year. The principal access that we have in the Rio Declaration became the federal law of environmental accountability, but it happened just 30 years after it was signed off. That's how long it took for the international law to become local. It is important to mention that these international changes are happening. The Commission for the Environment of North America, a group of social representatives of Mexico, Canada, and the United States that present their recommendations to the USMCA members. They made the recommendation to boost the environmental law in North America. It is bound to be created an office for the action in pro of environment that sets as a manifesto that there is a popular support to continue with the development of the environment law. This committee makes recommendations, and the recommendations that they make is to acknowledge the national, local proposals that are current and for the future. Currently, we are 1.2 Celsius degrees on average at a global level. That is a result of the concentration of the greenhouse gases of the last 150 years. And it has been acknowledged that the main responsibles are the developed countries. But we, who are in the process of development, we need to work our we need to do
150.
what we need to do
Eh,
for the coming generations.
recomendaciones
These recommendations
ambiciosas
that are so ambitious that we aspire to get us into trouble because they can create
pero hay
some poetry, but we need to take full action.
consultivo
This consultative committee, joint committee, makes a recommendation to back up development trainings for the marginal communities to make the best of the best practices and share transnational information across the border.
proceso de
It's important to strengthen the petition process, the request process to apply the proper environmental law.
disminuyó esta, ¿cómo se llama? Acción de la Comisión
Which
Ambiental
decreased the action by the North American Committee.
en la administración de Trump.
This during the Trump administration, it flourished.
Demócratas
The Democratic administration flourished a bit more, but I don't think we can expect that much starting January next year.
México pues tampoco podemos estar muy contentos, ¿no?
We cannot be that happy in Mexico either.
Coincido nuevamente con el maestro Alanis, que hemos
I agree with
crecido
Professor Alanis. We have taken step backs.
con mucho dinero, recursos.
It took lots of money, resources to reach the point where we were standing and we're losing that position. There's yet another important challenge to ensure that science-based decisions are made. The scientific desire is also being challenged and questioned. Why? Well, because during the last 200 years, certain environmental information was put on the table based on the space and the type of it. That's how we do environmental management in all countries. During the last 3 weeks, maybe due to spatial technology, satellites all around the solar system, maybe due to those technologies, it is that we can understand increasingly what's going on in our planet and how it relates to phenomena within our solar system and beyond. Of course, these are arguments that are to be posed to climate change deniers who say, why worry? What's going to happen is going to happen, with or without us. But me, personally, I believe prevention measures that say we should do what's correct, and science that says that we have the largest greenhouse gases concentration during the last 1,000 years. And by the way, when I say that, I'm talking about the recent 100 years. Well, we need to stop it, right? We all need to take our part. We all need to play a role. We all need to commit. And it's not only us. There are several social actors. We all think that it's on the hands of the governments. Sometimes I surprise myself with a bias saying that this is the government's work, but it's not the case. It's everyone's job to do our part. We must learn to work in multidisciplinary fields. Just today, I taught environmental law and management class in the science faculty for biology students, and it's such an innovation for them. The law school where I once studied some years ago tried to have certain environmental law classes with professionals,
o biólogos e ingenieros en mi
The principal in that moment said, biologists and engineers in my school over my dead body. That's not gonna happen.
aprender a hacer trabajo
But
interdisciplinario.
we need to work across disciplines. It's a very big challenge. On the financial and corporate sector, there's also a commitment. Yes, we're seeing attempts by the World Bank, the World Financial Community, the European Union. All of these organizations have approved something that we know as sustainable taxonomy. This raises criteria not only for environmental issues, but social and governance as well. For any type of investment.
Indicar que hay que poner el dinero en
This tells us
las
that we should put our money where our mouth is. And we need to observe that international institutions are doing what they say they do. It's a relief for me to see that even if they're foreign companies and foreign investors, they will ask for accountability on all of these sectors. Otherwise, they won't bring their money in.
bienestar, riqueza en México. Por último, también lo mencionó.
Last, as mentioned by Gustavo,
Tenemos que seguir trabajando en el desarrollo institucional.
we must keep working on institutional development, on skill development. We're a terribly centered country. We have laws to distribute assignments across these three government levels, but it's all government branches, but it's all on the federal level, right? The federal level does everything.
Minas de material,
State level does what? Manage mines,
eh,
make sure there are some environmental impact actions. But truth is, we should distribute every action in a better way, and we need a better capacity for that. Capacities that follow the logic that we have just mentioned, that follow science, that promote social participations. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. The texts are already there. We just need to follow them. But here, close it, and if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you so much, Professor. Now, as a commenter, Dr. Miguel Ángel Cancino, who has pointed out that he will give general comments on these two interventions. I know, this is such a challenge to comment on these two topics. I mean, what I would like to do is to give some context. To give you some context on the comments made both by Gustavo and Diana. Diana was there with us in the first diploma that was in 1992 in Profepa from UAM. It was the first one, way before any other. So I'm glad to be here in her house, in this institution of ours. Again, just to give some context, there are several aspects mentioned by both of them, aspects that should make us reflect. First, the juridification process of the environment. Both Gustavo and Diana talk on how an evolution has taken part in our rule system. This is known as access to justice. After Rio, several statements were added to our legislation. Sometimes little by little, sometimes even slower, sometimes not at all. But we're trying to implement the real guidelines. In the 1997 reform to LEGEPA, this aspect of access to justice was one of the main axes, maybe even the one that was the most left behind. We made some progress, of course, on public access to decision making. You can see there are reforms to promote social participation in environmental impact or in protecting natural areas impacts. Just a bit on the management of resources, but truth is, there was no real reform. However, access to decision making served so we could reach the judges through the established structures. What's important is to highlight that juridification processes must be properly done. We must be precise on how to incorporate said principles. We shouldn't only try to implement statement rules, right? They need to be enforced, actually. And among several principles were actually implemented. Regulatory principles are not part of our rule system or did not take part until 2011. Yes, there was this biosecurity law, be it with the wildlife law. But if we're talking about a full utilization of the resources, it didn't happen until this century. We're also talking about access to information. Before all of these rules regarding information access, and as Gustavo said, we're walking backwards with the NAI situation, but with a HEPA starting in 1996, we were already working on this. There's a full chapter in the HEPA related to the environment. Arhus was taken as a reference point. There are certain modifications in the text related to the Arhus Convention that is related to the European access to information that was later implemented to our own country's legislation. Speaking about access to justice, of course, we fell short. Gustavo was talking about access to justice, but be careful. This shouldn't be seen just as the possibility to access to instances and jurisdictional institutions. No, we need to look at it from a whole different angle. We need to talk about social justice that is linked to, well, every single topic that we have touched so far in these different discussions. Yes, it's evident for me. And well, if you haven't checked this caso, make sure you do. The advancements made possible
acceso a la toma de decisiones, acceso a la información, acceso a la justicia ambiental y, por supuesto, como decía,
can be seen in three strands: access to justice, to information, and social justice.
de mecanismos para garantizar a los
we need to ensure the mechanisms that give guarantees to defendants for the environment. Yes, there's still work to do in there. But then again, not only an administrative matter. We're talking about civil and constitutional. If we ask ourselves, is environmental law claim environmental law be claimed in Mexico? The answer is no, along with some other things. This makes it complex, especially when we take a look at the judiciary reform that's going on.
Un aspecto también, y esto lo señala Raúl Brañez.
Raúl Brañez pointed this out. Well, he's always pointed it out. This was Diana's focus, the international focus. He said, in the international landscapes, treaties and accords are made, great accords are made, but then local systems need to develop those treaties. There's this link between the two of them. Certain accords are done in Rio, and then you need to they need to be put into the legal system.
Justificarlos, pero adecuadamente. Y termino en los retos y perspectivas ya tanto Diana como Gustavo.
Now, talking about challenges and perspectives, I like to add just a bit. No, I'm not just commenting anymore, but please,
De manera urgente,
we are facing an urgent situation. We need to
tenemos que cambiar.
strengthen governance. We need to change our mindset. Yes, I've listened to plenty of the presenters, but nowadays, more than ever, we need to turn the wheel. We need to satisfy our needs in a different way. It's amazing, and I've said it, it's incredible that after such a pandemic, a result of the terrible relationship of people with the nature, we still keep making decisions the same way as we did before. We're dealing with very complex contexts, not only in Mexico, we're talking about a global landscape. If we don't build new paradigms for decision making, this degree and a half that's making its effects will take us to a whole different level. Level that, as our Canada colleague said, is full of uncertainty, not institutional uncertainty, no, uncertainty about the role of people in a world with serious problems about damage to the environment. So let's listen to Diana's and Gustavo's words. They have lots of experience, and I'd like to thank Jose Juan, of course, for the opportunity to participate in this colloquium. We've worked with Jose Juan for several years. I don't want to say it. I don't want to say the number, but it's been several. And thank you. Thank you so much for letting me be here. Thank you. Well,
Es momento de pasar a unas preguntas.
it's time for some questions.
Realmente han despertado muchas inquietudes. Tengo unas
Some worries have arisen. I have specific questions and some general ones. Let me know if you want to answer them.
Para el maestro Gustavo Alanis. Dice la
The first one is for Professor Gustavo Alanis.
Los mandatos de la jurisprudencia y criterios de la Corte Interamericana respecto de los derechos de acceso.
How have the mandates of the jurisprudence been implemented in relation of the 11-23/17 and related to La Oroya v. Peru? It's a very recent case. The ruling came out this year. It took lots of years. So there hasn't been a proper implementation so far, but I am sure it will happen, not just for this case, but for similar ones where constructive opinions have been required. In Hague, I think they're starting next week. It's just a matter of time and patience. We need to wait. We'll need to wait some reasonable time to make sure this can be actually implemented.
de regímenes internos. Lo que vale la pena mencionar con
Something that's worth mentioning, and in light of recent comments,
Muchas de las cosas que hay que abundar en esta parte de la implementación es que ha habido
el de ella sí suena. One more thing to add. Miguel Ángel talk about it.
¿Cómo se traduce, cómo se baja lo que se negocia en el Perspectiva?
How can we translate what's negotiated in the international treaty to the national level? It's difficult, yes, but there are several examples. Let me give you two. The first one is Stockholm Principle 21 related to international responsibility of the states. This principle says that, not my words, states can do as they wish with their own natural resources as long as they follow the UN recommendations and their own environmental policies. But what happens in their own soil what happens in their own soil does not affect another state. If you take a look at the 5th article of LEGEPA, you can find this is stated. This is just a way in which legislators can actually transform international law principles from a soft, non-binding statement and transform it into a binding national policy. CITES is the second one. How can we enforce CITES in Mexico? Through a rule 1057. So there are all different ways. There are different ways to implement international law into the national level, but I don't know if anyone wants to add something to this. Well, I shouldn't talk this much, but you see, it's important. It's very, very important to understand that this notion, the definition of sustainability is used differently in an environmental impact institution. I mean, we're talking about pollutants, we're talking about soil, they all get polluted. So we need to be specific. Juridification in LEGEPA goes hand to hand with two conditions. First, respect to the functional integrity of ecosystems and the load capacity of the same. This means follow what the science says. In a case study of environmental impact, you need to identify what's the main work, what's the effect of the ecosystem integrity related to the load capacity. Both concepts are left behind. Science is way beyond this point. Now we need to talk about the intrinsic value of nature. But this is just one example. We need clear references. We need to juridify principles and certain other commitments that come from international treaties or that come from scientific evolution. Just one little case. Well, since I have the floor, when I was talking, I mentioned the fact that during the second half of the past century, environmental legislation was based on space and type.
El convenio para proteger el oso polar.
We have legislation for polar bears, for whales, for a specific river, the peace treaty for the Mexican-American border. In Mexico, LEGEPA have a flora and fauna chapter, not wildlife, even less biodiversity.
Hoy ya está reconocido y aceptado por México.
But nowadays, the biodiversity agreement has been recognized by Mexico. I mean, biodiversity is a very rather simplified definition, but it recognizes a variety of ecosystem, species, systems, and genes. And humans are included there too. Once the human genome has been decoded, we know that human beings share 60% of our genes with bananas and kiwis, 75% is shared with fruit flies, 85% is shared with mice, 98% with gorillas, and 99.8% among ourselves. This proven scientific knowledge put us in a situation where we have to ask ourselves, why are we talking about natural resources management? It seems so far behind. I mean, we cannot talk about an amount of trees, eggs, or turtles. It's useless when they are part of an everything.
Vamos a otra pregunta. Esta es muy específica para usted, maestra Diana.
This question is specifically for you, Professor Diana. Do you consider that the consultation right on environmental issues is properly set in order to guarantee public participation in decision-making for both the public and private sectors?
Well, I will trick you. I will talk about the decision of the ruling of the Supreme Court of Justice in the case of the Yaqui community against versus the Sonora government related to the build of the Independence Aqueduct. The Sonora government decided to build an aqueduct. They got the authorization by the federal government. It was an aqueduct built with public state money. They run the public consultation. They were just really specific where they kind of hide the consultation in the last page, in the last corner of the journal. Should you have any comments, contact us. Of course, they ruled that it shouldn't be like that. For public consultation, you need to be in the place where the people are, in the language that the people talk. In a language that is straightforward and simple. That is culturally accessible, that is proper to the people you're talking to. And the Supreme Court mentioned, the public consultation does not mean that you have the authorization. If at the end of the day that you provided the full information on each of the bullets was properly replied to, the authority needs to make a choice. And you cannot make the consultation just putting in a journal the question, do you agree? I think that this is a good judicial ruling to talk about the public consultations.
Este es un ejemplo perfecto de acceso a la justicia.
This is an aspect of access to justice, right, Diana? I'm talking about the extension of the Veracruz port, where the Supreme Court asked to Semarnat to revoke
¿Por qué?
the authorization. Among the reasons is that there were several things to solve, but the project was segmented to get the authorization. And the court states you cannot segment it because the article 28, 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34 talk about the assessment of the building or the activity. And it is a global plan of building. Pretty sure that you're thinking about the Tren Maya situation, right? But it was another good example of access to justice in the subject of the environmental matters. I'm sorry, I need to go, but thank you very much for having me with you today. Thank you.
Bien, un momento nada más, si me permite
On behalf of one, we award you with this certification of diploma of participation, and this small present. Thank you very much for being with us. Oh, I love this. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Ok, esta pregunta creo que es específica para la
I think that this question is really specific
Dice,
to you, Ms. Diana. How do you think that the judiciary reform confronts the Escazú agreement and also the USMCA? What are the measures that we can take for achieving the institutional development? The judiciary reform, of course, is violent towards these international commitments made by Mexico. Without any trouble, I think that the government, well, without any question, the Canadian and the American government, but the citizens of these two countries, they can request they may request explanation of the Mexico and how are we going to fulfill the access to information by independent instances that we are losing with this change in INAI. In the case of the judiciary reform,
se pretendía quitar del artículo primero constitucional la referencia a la protección.
The government wanted to take away the protection to the human rights that are part of international treaties. I mean, I don't know the details, but the press disclosed that it was going to happen, but the president said, no, it is not bound to happen. But in the Escazú agreement that has been informed, it was published in the official journal. Now we're just getting the board for the Escazú agreements. Anyone who is a member of the Latin American people could claim to Mexico because we're limiting the access to the environmental justice. And the defense of the rights of the environmental advocates and the resolution of management controversies.
Judiciales, incluyendo la reparación de daños. O sea, son frases que ya están escritas, que ya están vigentes en México y que
Well, these are practices that are enforced in Mexico.
hay que reconocer el contexto.
We need to acknowledge the international context. There's a trend. There's a strange trend of the right and left populist leaders that
Las leyes en su propio país.
that just go for breaking the law in their own countries. Trump is at the mouth of everyone. He's another strange person with a criminal record, basically, of sexual aggressions. Now he's in office.
A partir del 20 de enero que viene.
He's nominating for general attorney to someone who has a criminal background. It's the same that is happening with the Argentinian president Javier Milei and the recently elected president in Europe. It is not exemption. And what I hear from leaders of opinion, this is not my area of specialty, but we have moved forward in terms of democracy at a global level. From last year to this year, there was the most number of elections in all the history of humanity. But it turns out that the voters are going for leaders that just make popular decisions instead of respecting the law. And we are going backwards in laws that I consider as a lawyer that shouldn't be. I don't agree with the judiciary reform, but I must tell you that the judiciary power was behind in terms of the environmental subjects. The judicialization of the environmental subjects came just too late. Professor Alanis, he was a pioneer in using some of the legal figures where we couldn't have collective action, for example, or the cultural defense. Professor Cancino, he worked with me in different moments in institutions that work in pro of the environmental law. And when we have access to information, we need to provide information to the people for the decision making, for protesting. People should be informed. People should know. And I got mixed feelings. I think that we have worked in the last 40 years, and I think that we are going backwards in the last 2 or 3 years. I have other 4 questions. I just would like to mention regarding what you are talking about is that in Mexico, we consider the state to be the defender of the rights. But one of the problems is when the state and its institution break the law, break these laws. This is what we have, this kind of situations that make us think and question the structure where we are functioning.
esta otra pregunta, dice para los dice
This is another question.
sobre
What is your opinion on the reserve of the Mexico City?
el estudio del agua del agua contaminada en la alcaldía.
What do you think about the situation of the contaminated water in the mayorship Benito Juárez? That is top secret information. It's illegal. The law of the Act of Access to Information, both the federal and the one from Mexico, all the information that is generated with public money is public information. It can be reserved information unless it is a national security subject. Well, that's an easy one. I agree. I think that the authority is reserving information that they shouldn't. Let's be honest, as Diana mentioned, in the environmental attorney's office, it's the only attorney's office back in 1920 that do not have the faculties to penalize. It does not have the authority to penalize, but only with providing information to the neighbors, it generates important effects. The defense of the environment that is higher to what we can produce with a fine or with a shutting down. Information empowers the neighbors. That's an important thing. And that was the regulation that we wanted. We wanted to have the full information, full open information in such an important case and complicated as it is in the case of contaminated water in Benito Juárez. This information should be disclosed. The authorities are afraid of that. I shouldn't talk about it.
Otra pregunta.
Next,
Dice así, y el sistema económico, político, social,
economical system, political system, and economical system that has generated to work against nature and life. Do you think it can continue if we want to save it? If we want to save ourselves collectively all around the world? I think that we need to read biology and sciences. What I hear and I have understood from the biology of the environmental engineers is something that we don't know as lawyers. The ecosystems of the world have a charge capacity. When we allow nature to recover, the systems are resilient. But we need to give their own time, not the human time. Not even the presidential terms, right? In which case in Mexico is 6 years. So what science states is that we are over the reloading capacity of the world by 4 times. The distribution of these resources that have been extracted from the planet are not equally distributed. There are few rich all around the world and millions of poor that are under the line of poverty, which is a sociological criteria and economical. I mean, we have the people that deny everything that happens, and people who says that human beings are so powerful that we will come up with something and nothing will happen. I think that history has showed that in the huge catastrophes that were created by humans, who are safe are the ones with the most resources. The poor people are the ones who suffer the most, the ones who pass away. I'm pretty sure that many of you know about the things that we have been talking about the sixth massive wave of extinction.
Yo soy de los que hay algún escepticismo, pero
I am a little bit skeptical about it, but they provide really interesting data. I invite you to check on the information on a platform that is IPEST
te da cuenta de
that shares information
la biodiversidad,
about how is biodiversity doing, how
cómo están los
the species in danger, how's it going. I mean,
cambiamos un chip.
I said, let's start thinking out of the box for a different decision making. Well, it was in the sense of this question.
Yeah.
We need to change the way we make decisions.
Perfecto. Bueno, las dos preguntas que tengo aquí están íntimamente ligadas. Se los voy a
Well,
responder.
these are the questions that I have here. I will read them together. I think that we can reply to this together.
A pesar de los cambios
Even though
constitucionales y legales,
the illegal constitutional reforms, the protection of the environment from the courts and the DAs, is it feasible?
sería un momento de acciones
Is this the right moment to have collective actions for the movements for the lack of responsibility in the environmental damage? My answer is yes, it is possible. There we have the judicial tools, the collective actions.
En este momento, un poder judicial tambaleante. Creo que estos
I think that these situations, these topics wouldn't be their priority to be solved,
independientemente de eso,
but independently from that, the judiciary
estas
is going to be there and tools are there.
responsabilidad por daño ambiental está
The responsibility for environmental damage is completely defined,
antes del año 2003.
different from the 2013 that we didn't have a federal law of environmental responsibility. Up to 2013, it was said if you want to go for the responsibility for environmental damage, go for the civil code and go to the judge and show the right of the right that you have to the environmental good that you want to protect. You want to protect the ozone layer? Show me your invoice. You want to defend trees
Las ballenas
or to the whales? Well, show me. Well, are these yours? How you show your ownership? You say, well, it is damaging me. Well, I see that you are in the right shape. Unless there's a direct cause, there's no.
que hoy tenemos una definición de daño ambiental que habla de
That's how we get this definition.
conceptos que
These are the concepts that the Romans left behind since 5,000 years ago.
dan interpretación del deterioro del medio ambiente o sus elementos
Well,
de manera medible.
you need to come with a measure, a way to measure it. It is not because it stinks or it looks badly. You need to identify the physical changes, the chemical changes, the biological changes with a unit, with a specific unit,
Interacción con el
and the interaction with the natural system. And that can be done scientifically. We need biologists and environmental engineers. It is not simple, but we need to keep on going.
Yo creo que no son insuficientes.
I want to agree, they're not enough.
Cuestiones.
We need to redefine several issues. Gustavo mentioned some of them from Escazur, especially for collective actions or for management, administrative accountability, prevention measures, use of alternative mechanisms for problem solving. So the tools are there. Yes, lots of them need to be revised revisited. But then again, thank you, Jose Juan, for being here. Thank you to everybody that's here.
A ver si ya está. Muchas gracias.
There we go.
Bueno, creo que ya no hay-
So I think there are no further questions.
Bueno, en este momento,
It is in this moment that we'll deliver this diploma of participation to Professor Diana. Thank you very much on behalf of our university, and one for Dr. Miguel Ángel Cancino as well.
y a continuación, la doctora Alicia Solín.
Up next, Dr. Alicia Solin.
Espérate que faltan los.
Hey, bring out the bottles. One for you as well. We need more.
One for the church.
La quería abrir yo.
I don't want to take more than necessary, so right at 5:24 p.m. November 22, 2024,
Damos por clausurado el coloquio.
we can officially close our colloquium on human rights perspective. Thank you very much to every presenter.